They say you can't buy friendship, but apparently in 2025, you can try to buy your friends' countries.
And if they say no, well, that's when the for sale sign gets replaced with something a lot uglier.
Welcome to the new Arctic reality. It's absurd, it's dangerous, and if you're Canadian, it's happening right next door.
So, the President of the United States just appointed the governor of Louisiana as special envoy to Greenland. And that guy's first reaction was honored to help make Greenland a part of the US.
Canada, we need to talk about this.
This used to sound like a bad late night joke. The whole let's buy Greenland thing back in 2019, people rolled their eyes and moved on. But this time, it's not a throwaway line on a golf course. There's a formal envoy, there's draft legislation, there are diplomatic protests, and there's American president who has flat out refused to rule out using force to get what he wants.
If you're Canadian, you already know that this is bad news. We've heard the 51st state rhetoric, we've lived through tariffs and continue to do so. So, when he starts talking about taking Greenland, we know exactly which neighbor is next in line to feel that pressure.
So today we are breaking this down. We're going to cover exactly who this new Greenland envoy is, the multi-trillion-dollar mineral map that everyone is fighting over, and the actual real-life bill in Congress to rename Greenland Red, White, and Blueland.
And most importantly, we're going to look at what this means for Canada's own Arctic sovereignty. Because if they can do this to Denmark, you better believe they're taking notes on us.
Let's start with what actually happened. Trump goes on his failing social media platform and announces that Jeff Landry, the governor of Louisiana, is now special envoy to Greenland. Not the Arctic in general, not to climate or to security, just specifically to Greenland.
And Landry doesn't say, I'm honored to strengthen our partnership, or I'm honored to support Greenlandic self-determination. His post is basically, honored to help make Greenland a part of the US. Like he's talking about adding another state flag and calling it a day.
Meanwhile, Trump is on camera from Mar-a-Lago saying, "We need Greenland for national security. We have to have it, not for minerals." Which in Trump speak means exactly that they need it for minerals. Greenland is sitting on a treasure chest of critical minerals the world needs for batteries, wind turbines, electronics, weapon system. Everybody knows it. So when Trump insists it's not for minerals, he's basically highlighting exactly why his movement is so obsessed with Greenland in the first place.
And then he claims that there are Russian and Chinese ships all up and down the coast, and that Denmark has done nothing to defend it.
Which is not true. Denmark has just boosted its Arctic and North Atlantic defense budget by billions. They're buying more F-35s that patrol Greenland right now and has increased their radar drone monitoring, while Trump is out there pretending they just left the keys in the door and walked away.
And as if appointing an annexation envoy wasn't enough, the US also paused several big offshore wind projects off its east coast, including ones run by Denmark's Ørsted, conveniently putting more economic pressure on Copenhagen at the exact same time.
And that's where every ally in the room should be saying, okay, if you're worried and want more military in the north, well, let's do what allies are supposed to do. We sit down together, we strengthen the existing agreements, and we patrol it together. You don't just take over somebody else's country, dude.
Listen, Denmark answered the call after 9/11, when the US became the first and only country to trigger NATO's Article 5. Denmark went to Afghanistan and ended up with one of the highest per capita casualty rates in the entire coalition. They weren't attacked, they weren't targeted, they went because America was an ally, and that's what allies do.
And now Trump is talking like the same ally can't be trusted with its own territory and needs to have him swoop in and save Greenland. If you're in Denmark, Greenland, or Canada, that's not just insulting, it's a slap in the face and a preview of how far he's willing to go when he decides your land is useful to him.
Denmark and Greenland are losing it in the most diplomatic and Scandinavian way possible. The Danish Prime Minister and Greenland's Prime Minister put out a joint statement reminding the world that Greenland belongs to Greenlanders, that borders and sovereignty are based in international law, and that you don't just wake up one morning and annex someone else's territory because you feel like it.
Denmark's foreign minister is so furious he summons the US ambassador, which is basically, in diplomatic language, what exactly are you people doing? And you can feel the exhaustion coming off of them. We have said this before and we're saying it again. No, you cannot take Greenland.
Now, here's the critical question. Why Greenland and why now?
Well, Greenland has been on Washington's wish list for a long time, as far back as the 1800s. You had American officials floating schemes to grab it then. Then there was the serious offer to buy it in the 1940s, so this didn't appear out of nowhere.
But the reasons it's back on fire now are pretty obvious. First, missiles. Greenland sits right along the shortest path for ballistic missiles between Russia and the United States. The US already has a huge base there with a missile warning and space tracking system. That's been there since the 1950s.
Second, resources. 80% of Greenland is ice, but the other 20% is not just empty rock. Reports from Danish and Greenlandic geologists say that the island holds over 24 critical raw minerals. Rare earths, lithium, tungsten, copper, zinc, you name it.
Third, shipping. As the ice melts, new Arctic routes open up. Shipping between Europe, North America, and Asia can literally be shorter and faster by cutting through the top of the world. Whoever controls the choke points, like straits, deep water ports, airfields, has a huge advantage, both economically and militarily.
There's even an actual bill in Congress called the Red, White, and Blueland Act of 2025 that authorizes the president to purchase or otherwise acquire Greenland and literally rename it Red, White, and Blueland. This is not a joke. This is the real title of a real bill.
So when people say, relax, he's just being dramatic, which I have literally had American friends say to me, it's just about town halls and speeches. No, it's not. There's a serious strategic weight behind this. The difference is, past American presidents looked at Greenland and thought, we need a defense agreement. We need cooperation. This crowd looks at it and thinks, we need the deed.
And this is where you realize it's not just one man having a midlife crisis with a Sharpie and a map. It's a whole movement that has convinced itself that annexing a giant Arctic territory is a reasonable project.
For decades, the Arctic was a place where Canada, the US, and Nordics quietly cooperated. NORAD, shared early warning systems, joint exercises. We weren't perfect, but the basic idea was we're on the same side.
And that used to be enough. The US already had what it needed in Greenland through agreements with Denmark and Greenland. It already had what it needed in Canada through NORAD, NATO, and bilateral deals. If there was a concern about Russian or Chinese activity up there, the easy solution was to just sit down with allies and update those agreements.
But now, that's not the instinct. The instinct is, if there's a strategic asset, it should be American property.
And that's where this becomes our problem. Because if they'll talk like this about Greenland, a democratic territory that clearly says no, then we know exactly how serious to take the threats they make about us.
And if you want to know how serious Trump is about Greenland, just look at who he put on this file. Jeff Landry isn't some neutral envoy. He's the hard-right governor of Louisiana and former attorney general, and his record is brutal. His whole history is about punishing the vulnerable and rewarding the powerful.
Current Affairs, ABC News, ProPublica, and other news outlets, which are all linked as our sources in the description below, by the way, they land in the same place. This is a man who guts parole, stuffs environmental posts with fossil fuel allies, and a guy who has glued to the fossil fuel industry while communities along Louisiana's Cancer Alley choke on pollution. He's fought climate action, backed former oil and coal execs for key environmental jobs, and treated climate disasters like background noise. So that's the man Trump just put into a special job tied directly to Greenland's future. Not a peacekeeper, but a guy whose career is about control.
And honestly, that's the heartbreak in all of this. For most of our lives, the Canada-US relationship was about trust. It wasn't perfect, but it was built on the idea that we had shared interests, values, and basic respect.
We built defense systems together. We stood up to the Soviets together. We traded with each other so much that our economies basically grew up attached at the hip. We spend more time arguing about which side invented Hawaiian pizza than whether one of us might try to annex the other.
And now we're watching a movement in the US that sees history as a weakness. In their eyes, alliances are soft, cooperation is soft. The only thing that counts is control.
The irony is the US had more influence in the Arctic when it acted like a leader among allies than it will ever have when it's trying to bully everyone. When you ignore international law and start talking about taking land by force, well, every other partner in the room starts quietly asking themselves, okay, what do we do when you turn on us?
And that's where Canada is today. We still want that old relationship, mutual respect, shared security, good faith. But we're not naive. Once someone tells you to your face that they'd like to turn you into the 51st state, jokes about annexing Greenland don't feel harmless anymore.
So, what does this all mean? Because this is not some distant European drama. Greenland sits on one side of the Arctic, we're on the other, and running right between us is the Northwest Passage. Canada says that passage is ours, internal waters, Canada's sovereignty. Washington keeps insisting it's international and it's a highway that they can sail through whenever they feel like it.
Now, put Trump's Greenland move on top of that. If he gets more control on the Greenland side, you end up with a US that already refuses to recognize our claim to the Northwest Passage, now planting even deeper roots on the eastern side of the Arctic while the ice is literally melting and those roots are opening up. That's not some academic dispute. That's pressure on Canada from both sides of the map.
And it's not just about where the ships go. Our north is loaded with oil, gas, and critical minerals of our own. And those new shipping lanes up toward the Beaufort Sea in Alaska, well, whoever sets the rules in the Arctic has a huge say over all of that. If Washington can get away with saying national security lets them ignore Denmark's sovereignty, then it becomes a lot easier for them to shrug off ours.
You can already see Ottawa reacting, luckily. We've got new consulates in places like Nuuk, Greenland, and Anchorage, Alaska. There's talk more of Arctic defense spending, more joint exercises, more NATO language about the high north. There's also more patrols, more infrastructure, and more diplomatic outreach to Nordic countries and Indigenous governments.
And that's not because Canadians woke up one morning and decided that we're obsessed with military budgets. It's because our closest neighbor is threatening about annexing us one week, slapping us with illegal tariffs the next, and now circling the Arctic like it's a for sale sign.
And underneath all of this are the people who actually live there. The Arctic is not an empty white space waiting for flags. It's Canadians and Greenlandic Inuit communities. It's families who have been on that land and water for thousands of years. Every "what if we took Greenland" line out of Washington, every single stunt over the Northwest Passage lands directly on them.
When Trump waves his hand and says, they have no military, we have to step in, he's not just insulting Denmark's government, he's erasing the people who live there and turning their home into a prop in his whole security story.
And we've seen how that story goes. When powerful countries start using protection as the excuse, it rarely ends up well for the people who actually live there.
So what do we do from here? Well, Canada needs to invest in our own Arctic future like it actually matters. Infrastructure, defense, science, support for the northern communities, serious partnerships with Inuit organizations, not just because of Trump, but because this is our home. We either do it ourselves or we let other people define it.
We all need to use our voice and speak up. We need to shut down this talk from fringe Quebec and Alberta separatists who are clearly being controlled by MAGA influence. We need to back Denmark and Greenland, because if annexation talk becomes acceptable there, it puts a target on us as well.
And this part is important because this is not Canadians versus Americans. Most Americans have more common sense than the people pushing this agenda. They're tired too, and they're just worried about basic bills, healthcare, and the future for their kids. The last thing they need is a government obsessed with repainting maps instead of fixing anything in their own home.
Our problem isn't Americans. Our problem is a radical political project that treats everything, including their own allies, as disposable.
So if you're watching this from the US, here's the question I'd be asking. Do you really want a government that can look at a democratic territory like Greenland and say out loud, we have to have it, and then just shrug off every objection from its own allies?
And if you're watching from Canada, the question for us is, are we going to pretend that this has nothing to do with us? Are we going to take our sovereignty seriously, especially in the North, before decisions get made over our heads?
Trump, Vance, and the Project 2025 crowd are telling us exactly who they are. The Greenland obsession isn't a side story, it's a window into how they see the world and want to reshape it. So yeah, the US is threatening the North, and Canada should absolutely beware. Maybe not panic yet, and definitely don't try to hide, but wake up, get organized, and defend what's ours with our heads clear.
And if you made it this far, hit like so this reaches more people. Share it with that friend who still thinks the Greenland thing is a joke. Subscribe, join the A-Team if you want to support this work, and tell us in the comments.
Do you trust this White House anywhere near Greenland or Canada's Arctic? Because pretending this is harmless is not an option anymore.
And if you want to support independent Canadians like us that don't think red, white, and blue land is a good name for a country, go grab some merch and check out our Substack.
Or you can find us on Facebook and join the A-Team. It's cheaper than buying Greenland and significantly less diplomatic drama.
Links are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Stay frosty, Canada. Ciao for now.